Hello, and welcome to Inventors Helping Inventors. I'm your host, Alan Beckley, inventor of the Wonder Wallet. If you're an inventor searching for proven ways to make money with your invention, if you dream to see your product selling in stores everywhere, you've come to the right place. There's no better place to get help than from experts, inventors who've already achieved success. Every week, I interview successful inventors, asking them the questions you want to know. Tune in to learn from the experts so you can get your invention out of the tank and into the bank.
When I was in primary school, which would be elementary school for the people in the US, I one day went to class and my teacher came into the class and told us the first man who landed on the moon is called Neil Armstrong. And I was like, wait, what? What do you mean? So people go to the moon. How do they go to the moon? I was so curious for days. I asked these questions, but no one had answers.
Welcome to episode number 598. Today, I interview Lily Asongfac. Lily Asongfac is a Cameroonian space enthusiast, educator, and international partnership expert, redefining success through innovation, community empowerment, and space education. As International Account Manager at Spaceverse, she drives collaborations across the globe, connecting the space industry and inspiring the world through storytelling. Her technical expertise includes designing a nanosatellite mission for the Gabonese Space Agency while at NMD Limited. Lily is also the founder of the Aerospace Baby Project, an initiative that brings space education to children through hands-on activities and storytelling. Her outreach spans continents, having taught space to students in Senegal and the United States. As the national point of contact for SGAC Cameroon and founder of the Youth for Sustainable Space Development, Y4SSD community, she actively engages youth in global space initiatives. Her work has earned her numerous accolades, including the Nebula Award, African Space Leader Award, Space Foundation Teacher Liaison, Flight 24, 2024 Emerging Space Leader Award, and recognition as a Tech Woman Fellow by the U.S. Department of State. In 2024, she was named one of the Women Engineers You Should Know by the Society of Women Engineers, USA, and awarded Young Person of the Year at the Cameroon Youth Awards. With a background in electrical and electronic engineering, telecommunications, Lily continues to challenge conventional paths of success, championing diversity, accessibility, and youth empowerment in Africa's growing space ecosystem. You'll want to listen to this entire interview as Lily talks about how she learned about Neil Armstrong's landing on the moon, and that event sparked her curiosity and interest in the space program that ultimately changed her career direction. Also, when she won a scholarship to attend the International Astronautical Congress, IAC, in 2021, one of the world's largest space gatherings, she vowed to return home to inspire and teach Cameroonian youth through her Aerospace Baby Project. And finally, how she is proud of her first three mentees, two of whom have earned master's scholarships in space engineering in France and Turkey. Now let's get right to our interview with Lily Asongfac. Lily Asongfac, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast with us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Alan.
You bet. Lily, could you share a bit of your background with our listeners? Where did you grow up and go to school, and what did you do before you became an engineer and an advocate for engaging youth in space? Could you share that with our listeners?
Sure, it's my absolute pleasure to share that. So I was born in Kumba in the southwest region of Cameroon. So that is the English-speaking part of the country. And I pretty much lived there my entire life until it was time for uni, when I left Kumba for Boya, which is the capital of the Southwest region. And I studied at the University of Boya, where I got my bachelor's degree in electrical and electronics engineering.
It's good to know that connection and how you got started with that. And my next question that would feed off of that, now that we understand your background there a bit, you're an engineer with a background in electrical and electronic engineering. I think it was in telecom originally. Is that right?
Yes, so I majored in telecommunications engineering.
Okay. So my question for you is with that, and I was in telecom for 25 years, by the way, so there's a connection here, but at what point did you become interested in getting involved in the space industry within Cameroon and also the Gabonese Space Agency? Could you share how that connect the dots for our listeners, how that came to pass?
That's a very interesting question. And I'm glad you asked that, Alan, because my space journey, I would say, started when I was much younger, but then there was a pause and it only continued when I got into university. When I was in primary school, which would be elementary school for the people in the US, I one day went to class and my teacher came into the class and told us the first man who landed on the moon is called Neil Armstrong. And I was like, wait, what? What do you mean? So people go to the moon. How do they go to the moon? I was so curious for days. I asked these questions, but no one had answers. And we did not have libraries or the internet for me to do research to get the answers for myself. So I eventually stopped asking and continued my education. And I was very good with mathematics, so I knew for sure that I was going to do science. And once I graduated high school and got into the engineering school at the University of Boya, I got exposed to an entirely new world. So we had computers, we had a library at the university. I had a computer of my own because that was in 2016. So things had changed a little bit. And I then remembered that I had questions when I was younger. So I was like, wait, now I have these resources. Let me get the answers that I never got when I was a child. So I went on my computer, did a Google search, literally the words, how did Neil Armstrong get to the moon? And then I was exposed to the entire world of aerospace. Learned about rockets. He's called an astronaut. I heard the name NASA, or I read about NASA, and all of that information from the Google search. And in that moment, I had a turning point. That's when I decided that, you know what, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And because I found space to be very interesting, the whole concept of people going to the moon or people even traveling out of the earth was so fascinating. And since I was already studying for a degree in telecommunications engineering, I spent the rest of my time during my bachelor's degree studies trying to learn more about space. We do not have any programs in Cameroon at all, anywhere that teaches aerospace engineering or any course or discipline around the space industry. So I then had the responsibility to teach myself through the internet. And I connected with so many people on LinkedIn, telling them about me, telling them about my interest in space and asking for resources if they could share. I did take a course on an introductory course in space missions design, where I learned how to design nano satellites. And when it was time for my final year thesis at uni, which would then give me the clearance for graduation, I decided that I wanted to do a space-related project. I connected with a professor on LinkedIn who at that time was a lecturer in a South African university, told him about myself and my interest in wanting to do a space-related project, which again was going to be the first ever space-related thesis to be done at my university, if not the entire country. So that is a little fast-paced story on how I transitioned from questions when I was a child to getting answers in uni and then deciding that this is the path that I want to take.
Well, Lily, that's a fascinating story. And there's several elements I'd like to share as I was listening to you with our listeners. If I were to say it from a high level, a Google search led you to a whole new career direction and opened up a whole new world for you in a way that you hadn't been able to fully explore in your younger years, just because there's not the internet and Cameroon was not into space. And so, you were disconnected from information sources. You had a huge curiosity, but not much way to act on it until you got into university. And then all of a sudden, as we say, Google's your friend. And especially the Neil Armstrong story resonates with me, Apollo 11, because my family and I had taken a vacation to Panama. So we were actually in Panama when Neil Armstrong was on the moon. So we were watching it from there. So made sort of a connection there as well. But it is always interesting and fascinating to see the turning points in people's lives and how they move in a different direction because of a particular event. And I think your story really illustrates that well.
Thank you, Alan. And yes, I absolutely relate with the fact that there are certain moments that happen in people's lives and it just changes everything. So I'm very glad that happened to me.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a little bit of a different direction here, and that is, as an engineer and a space enthusiast, did you find that there were barriers you had to overcome as a woman? And if so, could you share with our listeners what were some key barriers that you were able to overcome, and how did you navigate them? Did that happen in your life experience?
That it absolutely did, definitely. Even before I became an engineer, right back to the stages of being a child and loving mathematics and wanting to do science. There, but right now it's changing, and thankfully. But at that time, there were a lot of stereotypes around girls doing science in my community, especially. If you were too good with mathematics or if you wanted to do science, there would be a few pushbacks saying you shouldn't study too hard. A girl child is not supposed to do science. I remember one time when I told one of my uncles that I wanted to be an engineer. At that time, I said I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. And then he took my hand, looked at it, and then he was like, "You mean you want to hold a hammer with these tiny hands or a spanner with these tiny hands?" And that the community just has this impression about gender roles and careers that are tied to genders and what a girl child shouldn't do. But I'm glad that I overcame those. I just kept studying, pretty much creating a path for myself. In my entire family, I was the first person to do science in itself. I know my granddad was a maths teacher, but when I talk about my direct family, then I was one of the first people to do science. So I ended up being in classrooms, be it at engineering school or during the high school days in the science class. It was only about 25% of the class that was female. That automatically, even without you meaning it unconsciously, you feel like this is going to be a difficult career path because very few girls are here. Why are there very few girls here? Doesn't mean it's so hard. And then it just became a challenge for myself. I was like, if I'm in this class, then I'm trying to prove that women can do it. If I can go through this, then I think many more young girls growing up, even within my direct family, would know that they can do it as well. So that is, I think that's the main challenge that I faced, the fact that I wasn't surrounded by so many girls, but mostly boys, which ended up being a reason to keep me going because I then realized that what I was studying was bigger than myself. Like the path that I was taking would go a long way in inspiring many more young girls.
That's a fantastic story. And I think it's what I take out of that is several things. You saw it as a challenge. In other words, there were a lot of aspects of this that were unfair, and there were a lot of biases that even in America, we've seen that quite a bit, et cetera. So I think you showed that you can power through it and you can set the example for other people. And that, as you said, things are changing. And I think it's great things are changing. Thanks for sharing that story with us. So I want to speak a little more specifically. You founded the Aerospace Baby Project to bring space education to children via activities and storytelling. And today you actively engage youth in global space initiatives. What caused you to be specifically interested in space-based education for youth? And did you feel that youth were overlooking space opportunities or perhaps felt that they were out of reach? Could you share with our listeners your thoughts on that?
In 2020, I got my bachelor's degree, and in 2021, I came across an opportunity again on the internet from the global space community, which was an application to attend one of the biggest space gatherings, which happens every year. It's called the International Astronautical Congress. In October 2021, I applied and got fully funded program or scholarship to attend this conference. So the IAC, as it's abbreviated, is an event where the global space industry comes together. So youths, young professionals, experts, astronauts, you have the big companies like X, Blue Origin, and all the, including the government space agencies. Attending the IAC was a mind-blowing experience. I found myself in the midst of thousands of people from all over the world who all had one interest, space. So they were speaking the language that I wanted to listen to. I pretty much realized very soon that I was the only Cameroonian at this event. And I ended up making the decision that I would want to come back to the IAC, but no longer being the only Cameroonian, or not being the only Cameroonian in space related spaces. And when I came back home, I created the Aerospace Baby Project. The target was to go to the very basics and to go to the primary schools, the secondary schools, so that would be right up from K through 12 for the US listeners. And I went there, and my goal was to educate the children, to tell them about what I had experienced. I showed them pictures, told them this happened, and I wasn't born out of Cameroon. I haven't gotten an education out of the country. So this is to show them that someone from the same country as them, who has gone through the same system of education as them, got this opportunity and got to mingle, in quotes, with people from all over the world and people who went to the best schools. And I realized that a lot of young people growing in Cameroon, and later on I realized that it's mostly non-space faring nations, so countries that do not have maybe a space program. You find out that the youths, as well as the adults, like the parents and all, do not really know what the space industry is about. When I say space, the first thing that comes to somebody's mind is astronauts, rockets, or maybe they think about the stars and asteroids. But then the whole career opportunities that exist within the space industry, from space law to space medicine to space data analysis, satellite communication, and even right down to the basic things that we use every day. Like the moment we wake up in the morning and we pick up our phones, we've already interacted with so many satellites, at least 10 satellites in space. And people go about their days not knowing this is what happens, which makes space to remain an abstract topic to them. So the whole goal with the Aerospace Baby Project was to educate kids. And I decided to go back to the same classes around the same time when I had those questions about space several years ago. And I was like, I want to be the person they would come to with those questions. We've heard Neil Armstrong went to the moon. How did he do it? That's what inspired me, and that's what pushed me to creating the Aerospace Baby Project, which then grew into an even larger community of not just elementary school children, but to university graduates who maybe had curiosities about space when they were younger, but then they went on and did something else. Maybe they did physics or chemistry, and now they want to find a place back in the space industry. So we created a society called the Youth for Sustainable Space Development, Y4SSD, through which I mentor university students or graduates who want to get into the space industry. And I actually hammer a lot on the fact that they need to have a passion, because I think it's just easier to get the most out of a certain experience if you truly love the idea. So I'm not trying to, most times I tell them I'm not trying to force them to do space, but I'm just exposing them to what space is, and then they make the decision. And if it's something they want to do, then I'm happy to give all the support. And so far, I've had 3 mentees who have attended international space conferences like I did several years ago at the IAC in 2021. And 2 of them even went on to getting master's scholarships to study space engineering, one in France and one in Turkey, at the International Space University in France, which I am very proud of. That's how the Aerospace Baby started. That's where the whole concept came to me, and that's how far we've gone to date.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And as I was hearing you and summarizing my own mind, you really created an amazing opportunity to influence children. You looked back at where the deficits were where you were a child, when, there just weren't opportunities or bridges, and space was not something that you could access or even read much about in the environment you found yourself in as a child in elementary, et cetera. And you wanted to shine the light that you had found onto others who were likely much in the same situation you were, children that were growing up, and you wanted to give them an opportunity to learn about space. Children, before they're so influenced by adults telling them, oh, you can't do that, you can't do this, because children's minds are unpolluted by that until adults teach them otherwise, it seems. So that was a great opportunity. And I'd say what I'd summarize, say you created a bridge for them, a bridge to say, oh, wow, space can be an opportunity for me. And there's places I can go, there's things I can do, and I can get an education in that area if that's something I'm interested in. And finally, I would just say, first of all, the excitement of you attending that IAC, man, I would have loved to have gone to that, SpaceX and Blue Origin and all these others. But also congratulations on the fact that you've now got 3 mentees that as a result of the actions you took, you were able to influence their paths going forward in a really exciting way.
Thank you, Ellen. And so I just want to share a little bit about the type of sessions that I have with the kids. So most times when I go to their classes, I just start from the very basic concepts from the solar system, telling them about the different planets, teaching them about the planets. And then we watch a video, maybe on YouTube, on the NASA for Kids YouTube channel, or any of the YouTube videos that basically simplifies the space jargons into animations that kids can understand. And I realized that they're really doing that. And after that, we do a sketch. I ask them to draw what they would love to do in space, or what planet they would love to travel to. And one very interesting thing that happened is during one of my trips to the US, I bought a very mini telescope, mini because it's not for deep space exploration or anything like that, but it was a very small telescope, about $50. And when I took that telescope to one of the classes, these children went ballistic. They were so excited. It was their first time ever seeing a telescope. I never saw a telescope when I was a child. It's only when I got into the space industry that I saw one for myself. So I know how far a very small step like that can go for them. An experience like that would keep them dreaming, keep them wondering. Yeah, I've had very good feedback, and it always warms my heart to see how excited and fascinated kids are. And they ask the most interesting questions, sometimes questions that I cannot even answer. Yeah, they really challenge me, and I love it.
Yeah. Again, thanks for sharing that as well, because it just shows how you open up these windows and doors for them to further explore on their own. And so that's amazing. I wanted to ask a future thinking question that is with regards to aerospace and the space industry in Africa. What do you see as the future? Do you anticipate that other African countries will be joining launch facilities soon or developing launch facilities soon, besides Kenya and South Africa? And also, landlocked countries have a bit of a challenge, as for safety reasons, launches are best done from coastal regions. So that certain countries might have a little difficulty in the middle of Africa developing a space program. But anyway, so basically, what do you see as the future of the space industry in Africa, and where do you see that opening up and developing, would you say?
I think right now one of the biggest challenges or the gaps that we have as a continent is not having a lot of human capacity. There are a few young people who are very passionate about space, and they're taking courses, they're taking getting an education around the space industry in space policy and law, Earth observation, and all the like. But still, so many people still do not know about the opportunities and how far back we are as a continent compared to other continents as far as the space race. I'm not sure we call it the space race anymore, but as far as space technology is concerned, it's interesting because the African Union created the African Space Agency, and it got inaugurated sometime last year. It's the building, or the African Space Agency, will be running from Egypt. And I think that apart from Kenya and South Africa, which you mentioned, there are a few other countries, not many, out of 54 countries on the African continent. Only about 25 of them currently have a national space agency or a space program. And this means that there's not so much that's being done. But then there are the old players within the continent, like South Africa, Egypt, I would say Morocco, but I'm not sure. But I think Nigeria has had a space agency for 25 years now. And there are a few of those countries, but we could literally count them with our fingers. The countries with a relatively good manufacturing capacity or the possibility of having launch sites. I know there's been conversations around Djibouti, and even being a Cameroonian, with Cameroon being a coastal, not entirely coastal, but well, we're not landlocked, and the Atlantic Ocean. Lucky enough, where I live in Limbe, Cameroon, I can see the Atlantic Ocean from my window. I live in a coastal city, and with the country positioned almost around the equator, it could be a good site for possible launches. But then there seemed to be not much interest for most of the African countries around having launch capabilities or manufacturing their own satellites. Most of the countries that have launched satellites have collaborated with other countries, maybe through the BED program in Japan, or maybe some collaboration with China, or some collaboration with France, but it's always getting these international collaborations and then maybe having a few of their youth or staff to get the capacity and then work on a satellite, which is then launched. So getting it 100% manufactured from within the country itself or the continent is not something that has happened yet. But I think that there's so much opportunity there. So if we as a continent could do more to collaborate within ourselves, like maybe South Africa could collaborate with Nigeria to build their next satellite instead of getting international or help or support in whatever sense out of the continent. To be honest, I believe that within the next 15 years, we would see even more space agencies and space programs coming up from within Africa. The space market in Africa is emerging, and it just means that there's so much that can be done. But I see that the easiest way for countries to get into space has been by launching a satellite, like having their satellite in space for maybe Earth observation purposes. especially around applications like disaster management, agriculture. Yeah, I would say mostly disaster management and agriculture, because those two things are key. There are some key challenges that we face, and the space industry for, I would say, for an African youth or for a Cameroonian youth, the most question they will ask is, why do we need a space agency, right? We've got other problems, like there's no good roads. We have issues with electricity, and then you find them asking why we would even need to have a satellite in space. But then there's so much that having or owning our own satellite in space can help us to create better solutions around maybe the agricultural output, because agriculture happens to be one of the main source of living for Cameroonians, and I think Africans as a whole. Africans are looking more. By Africans, I mean the layman, like the regular African person or the regular Cameroonian that you find in the streets or in their offices. They are looking more around how space can help them here on Earth. So how is a satellite in space going to help me have better internet? So they're less concerned about actually launching maybe satellites from within, or having rockets launching satellites into space from the continent. But I think it's going to be a good opportunity, because being able to launch from here would make deploying the satellite or paying, like the fee that's being paid right now to have maybe a satellite from an African continent sent to the US for launch would be cheaper, because we'll be able to launch from within the continent. And then if there's some inter-African collaboration where countries can get to put forces together or bring together whatever it is that they're good at to make it better for everyone else, then it's going to be great. I'm not sure what the political discussions would look like around that, but yeah, I think the best way forward would be collaborations within the continent, countries collaborating with others and seeing how they can make this experience better.
Yeah, once again, thanks for sharing that with me. And I think I definitely agree with you that collaboration can be a way forward. In other words, it's pretty daunting if there's not much space industry going on for any single country to take on, saying we're going to do all this on our own. But if through the African Union or others, they can work with other countries and work together, then that could move things forward more quickly. And also, the one thing our Apollo program proved in America, there were lots of skeptics of why we should spend billions of dollars sending people to the moon when we had our own problems back home. But they discovered there was like a 3x multiplier for sure in technology for every dollar spent on the Apollo and space program and all the rest. There was probably about $3 in benefits in creating all sorts of other technologies more rapidly, including cell phone growth and other things. It might not have happened if we hadn't had the space program. So that's another thought on that. I guess my last question I would have for you, Lily, is how can our listeners reach you if they have other questions or would like to learn more about some of the activities that you're doing?
So I can be reached via LinkedIn or emails. On LinkedIn, I am Lily Asongfac, and my email address is asongfaclily@gmail.com. Just my names.
Okay, so they can find you on LinkedIn for Lily Asongfac, and that's spelled Asongfac, first name Lily. And then I think you said your email is asongfaclily@gmail.com. Did I get that right?
Correct, yes.
Lily, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us today and the fascinating, really series of adventures that you've gone through to get you where you are today. And I'd like to reserve the opportunity, maybe another 6 months or a year, to touch bases with you then and see what you've got going on at that time.
I would love that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alan.
You bet. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Thanks so much for tuning in to Inventors Helping Inventors. If you like the show, please tell your friends about it. Make sure to subscribe in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss a single episode. Talk to you soon.